Hi guys, Jay Nice on the mic. I'm back. I missed you guys. I'm back. So, wanted to talk to you guys about this book. I've talked about it before, but I've officially finished the book. I have a lot of papers and stuff in it because I think I'm going to do a series called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, where I talk about different aspects of the book that I really enjoyed. This is the first time I'm going to be doing this, but it was such a good book, and there's a lot of eye-opening parts. I'm sorry if you hear background noise because I have a heater sitting right next to me because I am freezing. This weather hit us real quick. So, today's topic, and I'm just going to flip to one of these sticky notes that I have because the book is really good. It's by Dr. Joy DeGruy Leary. So, you guys should pick it up. So this is a really, 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 really important part that I have saved. So in the book, it's on page 120 for those of you guys who have the book or will get the book. Page 120, and it's subtitled Passing Down the Effects of Trauma. And I thought that this book is really, really important because I always hear non-black people saying that black people need to just get over slavery, and in this book she really breaks down why it's not as easy as saying just get over it. So I'm going to read a little bit to you guys. So upon hearing the term post-traumatic slave syndrome, some of my readers might think to themselves, how could African Americans today possibly be affected by events that occurred so long ago? Oh, this is stuck. After all, African Americans are free now. In fact, they have been free for a long time. I've often heard European Americans irritatedly say, you know what, I don't own slaves, okay? And I'm tired of feeling guilty about what happened over 100 years ago, so get over it. Get over it. My response to them is that I am not a slave now, nor have I ever been a slave as far as I know. Nobody I have known personally was a slave. The fact is, I don't have experience of being a slave. However, 246 years of protracted slavery guaranteed the propensity and privilege of the South's white progeny, while correspondingly relegating its black progeny to a legacy of debt and suffering. That's deep. That's deep. What does that really mean? It really doesn't matter today if either of us, this is what it means. It really doesn't matter today if either of us, black or white, directly experienced or participated in slavery. What does matter is that African Americans have experienced a legacy of trauma. What is this legacy? How is it transmitted? The legacy of trauma is reflected in many of our behaviors and our beliefs. Behaviors and beliefs that at one time were necessary to adopt in order to survive, yet today serve to undermine our ability to be successful. She brings up another point. Today we know that if a child has an abusive parent, the likelihood that he or she will grow up to be abusive is greater than if the child came from a safe and protective home. We know that if a child comes from a violent home, there is a greater likelihood the child will grow up to be violent. We know that if a child comes from a home in which one of the parents goes to college, you guys know the rest. While some of what we learn through direct instruction, the bulk of our learning takes place vicariously by watching others. The individuals and families that survived the slave experience reared their children while simultaneously struggling with their own psychological injuries. They often exhibited the typical symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. The children lived and learned the behaviors and attitudes of their own injured and struggling parents. Today, we are those children. So what she's basically saying is that, this idea that black people need to get over slavery because... All right, I'm getting a little hot. This idea that black people need to just get over slavery because the white people currently living did not themselves own slaves and us as black people are not slaves is somewhat of a fallacy. And she's saying the reason for that is because although I am not a slave myself, and you don't own any slaves, the effects of slavery have trickled down to generations upon generations upon generations. You see this in any abusive relationship. I would say 99% of the abusive relationships. So if I as a woman am in a physically abusive relationship, there's a very high likelihood that I witnessed one of or both of my parents being abusive toward each other. So we saw this with Chris Brown and Rihanna. I think that there were reporters that said that Chris Brown watched his mom being abused by a man she was dating. Same with Rihanna. I think that there's a history of domestic abuse in her family. If you look at the people that you and I both know in our everyday life, I knew people in college. I knew one person in particular who was in a emotionally abusive relationship, and he was the abuser, and he watched his mom being mistreated by multiple men that his mom dated. So even though we ourselves are not slaves and you didn't own slaves, we learn our behaviors by watching others. So children learn, and this is what I teach actually in school, social learning theory. So social learning theory is super simple. We learn our behaviors not from what we read in books, but from what we see other people doing. So if I learn to treat women a certain way, it's because I've witnessed other people treating women in that particular way. And we model our behavior, particularly children model their behavior after adults and after people that they see. So that's a large part of what the post-traumatic slave disorder actually is. So she also says that today the African American community is made up of individuals and families who collectively share differential anxiety and adaptive survival behaviors passed down from prior generations of African Americans, many of whom likely suffered PTSD. The community serves to reinforce both the positive and negative behaviors through the socialization process. So, for example, in the 1940s, families frequently suppressed any signs of aggression in their children, particularly their male children. It was an acceptable and expected practice in the African American communities to severely beat unruly boys so they would never make the mistake of standing their ground with a white person in authority. While the direct relationship between the slave experience of African Americans and the current major social problems facing them is difficult to empirically substantiate, we know from research conducted on other groups who experience depression and trauma that survivor syndrome is pervasive in the development of the second and third generations. The characteristics of survival syndrome include stress, self-doubt, problems with aggression, and a number of psychological and interpersonal relationship problems with family members and others. It's just really interesting how she goes into very deeply what post-traumatic slave syndrome is. So I think that a lot of us who are Black are used to hearing in some capacity other non-Black people saying that we're complaining about slavery, we need to forget about it, we need to let it go. But I ask you to look at other groups that have experienced trauma. Do they tell Holocaust survivors and descendants of Holocaust survivors to get over it and forget about it? No, in fact, the German government gives a stipend or gives funds to Holocaust survivors and their families. So if you were to just forget about it, why are we giving these funds? And I'm not saying that this is a bad practice. I totally agree, and I think it's a great thing that they're doing this, because I think when you're giving money, although of course it doesn't erase what happened, you are acknowledging that wrongdoing actually took place. What Dr. Leary is trying to point out in her book is that we can't just tell Black people to get over slavery, because the effects of slavery, survivor syndrome, are trickling down and are still being experienced. When you see somebody, just because you did not experience that yourself doesn't mean that you're not experiencing the after effects. So I think until Black people and non-Black people realize that post-traumatic slave syndrome is a real thing, post-traumatic slave disorder is a real thing, and it's continuing and continuing and continuing, then we can't really make progress, because like I've said in previous videos, a lot of the rhetoric directed at Black people is that we need to get over slavery and forget about it. But I think this is a reason why this also goes into one of the reasons why the mindset of Africans is vastly different from the mindset of Black Americans. Part of this reason is because as an African person, I didn't experience, it's almost like a person who witnessed their parents in an abusive relationship, or their mom in an abusive relationship. They themselves were not abused, but seeing that has a different effect than not witnessing your parents in an abusive relationship. My experiences with slavery are different from somebody who had direct descendants in this country that were slaves. That mindset is different. So I grew up and we didn't talk a lot about slavery in this country. We, had discussions about how people of color can be disadvantaged, but I didn't have that same conversation with my family as somebody who was probably in America as a Black person for generations and generations. So I'm gonna, of course, this is like the first video of the series, but we're gonna get into this in more detail. Let me know below what you guys think. I keep saying post-traumatic slave disorder because I'm thinking of PTSD, but it's actually post-traumatic slave syndrome. So let me know what you guys think. I'm gonna make another video, another probably 10 videos about this book. It's super dope. I think it was like $10 or $15 on Amazon. You should definitely get it. And if you guys have read it yourselves, let me know what you think. If you know about Dr. Leary, she's a PhD, which is so dope. Let me know what you guys think about her as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.